For our second day of notes of our Rome unit, we're going to focus on the Roman army and the Punic Wars. All landowning citizens were required to serve in the Roman army for a set amount of time. That was considered your civic responsibility. If you wanted to become a government official, you needed to serve at least 10 years. And that makes sense. As a government official, you would make the call on whether to send these young men off to war or not. And it's a good idea that you have the experience of what the army lifestyle and warfare would bring to these soldiers. The Roman army was organized into units called legions. It was made up of 5,000 infantrymen. These were foot soldiers. And at the time, they wore heavy armor. They would be supported by cavalry soldiers. Those are soldiers who fought on horseback. And at the time, these were the most well-trained and disciplined soldiers. They were so disciplined that they had a punishment called decimation for those who couldn't follow orders in battle. Maybe they ran away from battle. And in this decimation, the entire unit was lined up, and they would count off every man, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. When they got to lucky number 10, the 9 men in front of him were given clubs, and they had to beat the 10th man to death. And nobody wanted to do that, so you better listen to your officers and follow their commands. Here we have an image depicting the Roman army. And you can see that they would move in box-like formations, much like how Alexander moved the soldiers around under his command. Okay, this box formation was easier to maneuver than the original phalanx that the Greeks used, which were longer lines. When we think of the typical Roman soldier, this is the armor and weapons that he would have with him. The armor was usually made out of iron, but sometimes they had access to steel, and other times they would even use bronze. When these soldiers went into battle, one of the first things they would do would be to throw their javelin at their opponent's formation. These javelins were made in such a way that if they missed the target, the javelin would break and it would not be able to be used again. They had a large shield that had a curve to it, and that curve was able to better deflect blows from swords, spears, or arrows. And like the Greeks, they would line up in formation, and the shield would cover you, half of your body, and half of the person next to you. So for their formation to work, they had to have incredible teamwork together. Instead of using a spear in battle, as the Greeks had done, they would actually use a short sword. That short sword was called a gladius. And the Romans would push forward with their shield. At the same time, they would all open up their shield from their body, attack with the short sword, and then place the shield back in front of them to protect them again. These curved shields also allowed them to form the tortoise formation if they were facing enemy archers. They would use these shields as kind of like a ceiling to protect their heads from the falling arrows. So they were well equipped for warfare. Here we have a Roman general depicted in the movie Gladiator. That's actually Russell Crowe playing the part. And he is fighting in Germania. Gladiator, definitely one of my top 10 movies of all time, but you guys can't watch it because it's rated R. So with their army, the Romans began to expand and conquer Italy. They would conquer the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south. They were successful because they had a strong, disciplined military, but also how they treated the conquered people. If you were conquered by the Romans, you have to recognize Roman leadership. You'll need to pay taxes to Rome and supply soldiers for their army. Depending on how fierce the fighting was, sometimes some of the people were enslaved. But generally, conquered people were allowed to practice their customs and keep their religions and beliefs. For a time, they could also keep their own system of money, but that would be replaced later by the denarius, and they would be able to keep their local government. Some of these conquered peoples would even become Roman citizens. And it wasn't the worst thing in the world to be conquered by the Romans if they didn't take you as slaves, because the Romans would actually come into your territory and they would help to build it up. They would bring in their ideas and you would gain advancements in infrastructure, new roads to trade on, bathhouses, all sorts of new stuff that came from Rome. So it could be bad, but it could also turn out pretty well. By 265 BCE, Rome had conquered all of Italy. They had gained power and wealth, and they now had access to the Mediterranean Sea, and they traded all over the Mediterranean Sea. They were known for their wine and their olive oil, and that's what they would trade to others to get what they needed. But the Romans had a rival in the city-state of Carthage, which is located in North Africa. We can see it on the map here, or right across from the Italian peninsula. Carthage was also strong and powerful, and they had dominated the Mediterranean Sea trade routes for quite some time, and this interfered with Roman trade. So we've got these two powerhouses fighting over control over the trade routes in the Mediterranean. Rome wants to be the strongest power in the Mediterranean. To do that, Rome needed to control the islands in the Mediterranean close to Italy. That included Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia, and they were under control of the Carthaginians at this time. So with Carthage controlling those islands, Rome really has only one way to get those islands from Carthage, and what started out as a trading rivalry would eventually come to war. So we end up with the Punic Wars. Why not the Carthage Wars? Well, the word Punic comes from the Latin word punicus, which means Phoenician. And we know that the people of Carthage were originally considered Phoenicians. They were a Phoenician colony, which had eventually gained their own independence when the Phoenician homeland was conquered. So you could also call them the Phoenician Wars, but for us, they're the Punic Wars. And it's a series of 3 wars. And these 3 wars were fought between 264 BCE and 146 BCE. So over 100 years of fighting, but they weren't fighting constantly. Okay, there were times of peace in between these wars. The First Punic War lasted around 20 years. It was fought on the island of Sicily and at sea. Now the Romans had a very strong army, kind of like Sparta, whereas the Carthaginians had a stronger navy. So the Romans invent the corvus, which is a boarding device. It's a ramp that we see here in the picture on the lower right-hand side. And it had a spike in it, and you would drop that ramp down on the enemy ship, and that would allow the Romans and their armor to get on the Carthaginian ship and take the ship over, killing all of the people on the Carthaginian ship. So using this corvus, Rome would win the First Punic War, and they would gain control of the islands that they were seeking. The peace did not last, though. One of the generals who fought in the First Punic War was so upset about the fact that Carthage lost that he raised his son to hate Rome, and his son was named Hannibal. Hannibal would go on to become a Carthaginian general, and he's considered a military genius, and he would take the fight to Rome. Hannibal had a daring plan to invade Italy itself, and he would try to invade Rome with 50,000 soldiers, 9,000 cavalrymen, and 60 elephants. But instead of going directly from Carthage to Rome, he had planned to surprise the Romans. He would sail to Spain and take his army through the Alps. All the while, he hoped to gain recruits from Spain and use the Alps to cover his invasion and eventually show up in Italy and surprise the Romans. And he was actually able to do that. And he swept through Italy for 10 years and defeated the Romans in battle frequently. So we have Hannibal, who is from North Africa, from Carthage. And this area in Spain would be his staging ground. He did need to get his soldiers, his horses, and his elephants to Spain. So he had to cross water. We'll see some pictures of that in a second. And from there, he recruited Spanish soldiers, and they follow the mountain ranges like the Pyrenees and the Alps, and eventually show up in Italy, and they beat up on the Roman army all over the Italian peninsula, but they're never able to invade the city of Rome itself. So here we see some of the elephants crossing the Mediterranean to get to Spain. And as you can probably figure, elephants don't really like being on boats or rafts. So according to legend, what the Carthaginians did to keep the elephants calm would be to put patches of dirt and grass down where the elephants would stand on the rafts, thinking that the elephants wouldn't realize that they were actually floating on water. And we have the Alps, which are not going to be easy to cross. Okay, they had been a natural barrier for the Romans for centuries. These Alps can be very steep and it can get very cold. So we can see the Carthaginian army made up of cavalry soldiers and elephants getting ready to cross the Alps. But these paths are narrow, they're up high in the mountains, and it doesn't turn out very well for those elephants. We can see these elephants near the cliff, and they're so big they're falling off the cliff. Poor elephant. It's probably what everybody's thinking, but I think I feel worse for this guy underneath the elephant. Yeah, if you hit the ground and survive, you're in for another surprise because that elephant's falling on top of you. And elephants are pretty heavy. So, yeah, things didn't turn out well. And most of those elephants didn't survive crossing the Alps. Hannibal's greatest victory over the Romans took place at Cannae. The military strategy he used at Cannae is still studied in military academies even today. So he had a great victory, but he was never able to sack the city of Rome. The Roman general Scipio would end up outsmarting Hannibal. He takes the Roman army out of Italy and instead attacks Carthage, which was undefended. Knowing that Carthage could be defeated easily as it was undefeated, Hannibal and his army follows Scipio, and Scipio is able to find the perfect ground to fight Hannibal on. And that battle takes place at Zama, and Scipio and the Romans win. Hannibal is defeated, he has lost his army, and he is now on the run. He ends up escaping to Anatolia, but he does not want to be caught by the Romans, so he commits suicide by drinking poison. Carthage is forced to pay tribute to Rome and give up all of its territory except in Africa. So it's a big win for Rome. The Romans were not satisfied, even after 50 years of peace. The Carthaginians were kind of like a boogeyman for the Romans. They were always afraid Carthage would come back and beat up on them like Hannibal had done 50 years earlier. So in the Roman Senate, you could hear politicians say things like Carthago delenda est, which is Latin for Carthage must be destroyed. Some of these politicians would end their speeches with Carthage must be destroyed, even if they were talking about something totally different. And the Romans listened. In 146 BCE, the Roman army invades, attacks Carthage, and they burn it to the ground. They kill or enslave all the people living there. They poison the wells and they pour salt on the earth, thinking that the salt will dry out the earth so they'll never be able to grow crops there ever again. So the Romans wanted to wipe Carthage off the map. And they did it. Here we can see Carthage laying in ruins. The earth has been scorched by the Roman army. Rome is now the sole ruler of the Mediterranean world. They controlled the entire Mediterranean Sea. They actually called the Mediterranean Sea Mare Nostrum, which means our sea, because they had total control of all the trade routes in the area. By 117 CE, Rome had extended themselves all the way from Britain in the north, Spain in the west, Anatolia in the east, and controlled all of North Africa. So this republic was slowly turning into what we would call an empire. And as their government changes later on, they will become an empire. So finally, we can look at this map and see all of the territory that Rome controlled. All the area inside of the red boundary would belong to the Romans. And the Romans would divide up these territories that they had conquered into provinces. Like we've seen in other civilizations, each province would have its own governor, and they would have to report to the Senate in Rome, in the city of Rome. So that's going to be it for notes today.